Hello, welcome to this podcast again. My name is Marieke de Witte. I'm a clinical psychologist, sexologist working at Maastricht University. I do a lot of research on sexuality and also teach on sexuality. And today we're going to talk about sexuality again. And we're going to continue talking about sexual diversity because I think it's so important to raise awareness and to understand that everyone has their own unique sexual preferences and desires, and that's okay. We need to embrace this diversity. And today we're going to talk about the LGBTQI plus community. So lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender, queer, intersex, and other. Now, in the previous episode, we have already addressed the issue of heteronormativity and the fact that we live in this gender binary world, and we discussed a little bit more about transgender. Now we're going to focus specifically on diversity in sexual orientation. And as always, I have invited two guests, two experts in this field. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being here.
My name is Kai Jonas. I'm a professor of applied social psychology with a focus on diversity and health of LGBTQI+ here at Maastricht University.
Okay, welcome.
Hi, and my name is Kennedy. Thank you for having me as well. I'm a master's student in biomedical sciences with a specialization in neuromodulation, so I focus on the brain.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me in this podcast because I'm not an expert in this field, so I would really like to share some thoughts about this topic. And I think, first of all, what I'm interested in is thinking about this idea of diversity in sexual orientation and the term LGBTQI+. It's always difficult to pronounce. Does it cover it all? What do we know about this? Maybe Kai, you can reflect on this.
Well, you have to look back sort of in history how certain minorities, sexual orientation minorities, refer to themselves. And a lot of terms are very culturally specific or country specific, language specific. And then they suddenly became broader, and a lot of subgroups decided, well, we do not want to call us gay men. We prefer another term, and then the alphabet started. And the alphabet was shorter in the beginning. Yeah. And now it's getting longer and longer, and everyone wants to put their letter in.
Yeah, there's some variations sometimes.
There are some variations, and that would be an endless discussion. Is there overlap, and does it cover it all? For the time being, LGBTQI+ is the term that we often work with internationally. But in some countries, I do a lot of research in Southeast Asia. It is absolutely not used. And the whole idea of identifying with all of these other groups just doesn't exist. So it's a very global north. It's a very Western construct.
Okay.
And it's not common all over the world.
But is it important, for the group, the LGBTQI+, to be part of a community? Does it sort of raise this community feeling? How important is it? Because it's now also the Gay Pride Month, and we have all these gay prides. How important is this actually to feel part of a group, to feel part of a community?
Well, I think every human being has the need to belong to certain communities, and sometimes these communities are chosen, and sometimes they're imposed on you. I think what you just said, it's Gay Pride Month, and there it already starts. It's not LGBTQI+ month, and a lot of people object against that. Do people identify with the LGBTQI+ community? Do I do that? No, I don't. Because I have very little overlap with a lot of these members. I see their needs and I see their concerns, but it isn't. I don't think it's an umbrella term that people a lot can identify with. But maybe Kenny has a.
Well, what I can say is, as a student ambassador, I come in contact with a lot of students and different people, and sometimes these conversations arise. Some students actually get confused because there are so many different things, and they're not really up to date. But because we have social media and we talk a lot with each other, that confusion we get rid of it really fast. And it's not about being part of a community, especially. It's more about raising awareness and as long as that happens, and then it's not really necessary to put someone in a
But is it
spot.
raising awareness about diversity and accepting diversity in sexual orientation? Is that the main idea then?
Yeah.
Because I was wondering, indeed, if you say you have all these different groups, is there a lot of overlap between the different, if you say gay people, bisexual people, pansexual people, queer, transgender, what about the overlap? Because now we treat them like as one community. It's like you said, not everyone identifies with the other group. So how should we see that?
That's difficult because I actually have a big friendship group, and I have a gay best friend, I have a lesbian friend, I have straight friend, one who's actually pregnant. So and we don't even think about this. We are just open-minded with each other, and as soon as we talk about boys or girls, it's not that, oh, because you're lesbian, do you like this girl? We just see each other as human beings.
Yeah,
and
that's a good part. We are all human beings. Why do we have to categorize?
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, when we think about this categorization in terms of sexual orientation, is it really a category like often people treat it, like I'm or heterosexual or I'm homosexual? Do we see sexual orientation as this linear, stable phenomenon, or is it more like a dimensional continuum, the idea of sexual orientation?
Well, sexual orientation on a population level is on a continuum. You'll find as many expressions as individuals that are out there. For a specific person, and speaking about myself growing up as a gay boy, you want to put a label on yourself. And it's really difficult in certain stages of your life that you don't have that label, that you don't have that accessibility to who am I, what am I? And then you don't want to, or some people may, I didn't. And in certain phases of your life, this may change. You want to put a label on yourself because you want to know who you are, and you don't want to live in this fluidity, although some people choose for this.
Yeah, exactly.
So everything's possible.
Yeah.
But you need to know who you are and whom you desire, at least at a certain moment, with the potential of change at a later moment in your life.
But it feels that for society that is difficult. The society wants to categorize you're or heterosexual or homosexual. And is it a personal choice, or is it because you're forced in our society to sort of choose a category? Because it's like you say, there is this fluidity, and we know that sexual orientation in women is more fluid, that it would be more, that often women sort of fall in love with a person, and it could be a male or female. It's really more it's independently of gender identity. So this idea of fluidity is often difficult for people to grasp and so to capture. So they feel like, or I'm this or this, but can we really say I'm 100% heterosexual or I'm 100% homosexual? There's so much variation.
Most likely we can't say that, and we can't look into the future what's going to happen at a later stage. But we also have to understand that this categorization, as a general psychological principle, is a principle of energy conservation. We categorize because if we would have to investigate every individual in every situation that comes up, is like, what is that person going to do? It's going to cost us a lot of time, a lot of energy. And it helps us to work with categories. And these categories are leading to abstractions. And with the abstractions, you're losing fine-grained information. And that's where the conflicts are starting. It helps to say, well, Kennedy, based on the features that I see, most likely male, so let's put him in this box. It helps me to tailor my response to him. But if I would have to really figure out, well, what are the nuances, I may make mistakes. It could take much longer, and I'll be very exhausted afterwards. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. But we also have to recognize, if we want to have a certain cognitive fluidity, then categories are inevitable.
Yeah, It's for the ease of communication, you say.
Yes.
It's kind of part of our of how we function.
Yeah.
Is it? And if you think about your community, your friends, your group, is it an issue? Do people talk about like this is my sexual orientation, or I'm? You know, we have these Kinsey skills that
Yeah.
you have.
Yeah.
Where do you place yourself on the continuum? Do you say, hey, I'm a 75% heterosexual? I mean, that's not how we communicate, right?
No, it's true. Well, an important part of this is actually it's my friend group. It's the community. We know each other already.
Yeah.
It's at the point where you don't know the person yet, and you just meet each other, and you have to introduce yourself as being gay or being straight. That's the point where it gets a little difficult.
Yeah.
But some people don't. Like for me, I don't even bother saying how it is. But if you have a problem with that, you start, okay, now I have to say I'm binary or non-binary or gay, and you start facing problems if the other person doesn't understand. But if you had that conversation, it's all over. The friend knows how you think, knows how you like to dress. So if you show up in a dress one day, they won't look at you at a different way. So it makes it easier.
Yeah. But it's more indeed if you meet new people that you sort of automatically label yourself as a way to for the ease of communication. But it also seems.
But let me. There's another thing there in Germany. There was this sort of funny statement where you had a gay comedian, and one of his skits was that he said, "I'm gay and I would like to have a scoop of strawberry ice cream." And what he wanted to point at is, well, is it relevant that I'm gay when I want to have strawberry ice cream?
Yeah.
And what we do experience in these days, and that's maybe a fashion or a specific phase, that we put a lot of emphasis on our sexual orientation. And yes, sex is political, what we do in bed is. But on the other hand, you can also ask yourselves, do we need to disclose that? Is that relevant in every moment? And yes, from a heteronormative perspective, it's the minority that has to explain themselves. And that is, oh, you're gay. So are you more the female or the male in bed? And you're immediately
put the heterosexual label on.
You put the heterosexual labels, you put their categories on it, and that creates a lot of friction. You don't want to explain. You don't want to give that information, because the heteronormative side doesn't have to explain themselves what they are doing.
Yeah, exactly.
But sort of by the same token, you can also say, is it relevant? And it becomes relevant when there is overt or covert discrimination. And then we need to talk about it. And then we need to sort of put it into the spotlight. But for the rest...
Yeah, why would we bother? Why would we bother?
And I also understand that for some people, and that's why I said sort of in terms of developmental stages, when you want to find out who you are, it's much more important.
Yeah, obviously.
If you have experience of being lesbian, gay for 30 years, you can look at it from a much more relaxed perspective.
Yeah. It's really, I think they're important that we make this distinction between sexual identity, sexual orientation, sexual behavior, sexual attractiveness, because of sexual attraction, it's these are all different concepts. And what I sometimes feel is that when you talk with some people, lesbian friends who say, like, I don't want to identify as being a lesbian because I just fell in love with this person. This is a woman, but my next partner can be a man. I don't know. It's not part of my identity. And then you can really see that there's so much diversity, that some people just say, I feel attracted to a woman now, but I don't feel like this is not part of my identity, of my sexual orientation. And then if you think about that, I mean, there's also like this discussion on asexuality recently, that some people who are asexual indicate this is a sexual orientation. So then it's also this discussion of labeling. Why is it so important if it's a sexual orientation or a philosophy or a way of living or part of your sexuality? Why do you need to call it a sexual orientation? What's to gain for this group of people?
Well, what's to gain? We also have to look at what is the origin of these labels. And in many cases, the United States of America are the origin of these labels. And then we need to look at the US culture, which is a culture that is based on categorizations and also giving certain rights or withdrawing rights from certain groups. So it can be beneficial to be able to label yourself as I am X, Y, Z. because that may get you into college easier, or you get a discount, or you have certain advantages, or it's protective, or it does something with you. In a European context, we have a completely different tradition, but we're taking over a lot what comes from the United States. And there is a lot of critique also from the global south, from people like, no, we don't play these coming out identity politics. This is not what we do. And if you look back into gay history, the whole idea of top and bottom sexual positioning, in the 60s, no one talked about it. It didn't exist. When I moved to the States and went out to gay bars, they asked me, so are you a top or a bottom? And my answer was, does it matter? Do I have to know? And people would turn around and walk away because I wasn't fitting their expectation. And so I learned I have to label myself. Did I want to? No. And I think we should also ask these questions. Why do we use these labels, and does it fit with the societies and the environment that we're living in? And what you just said with your circle of friends, it doesn't matter.
In your mini society, it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Someone can be pansexual for half a year and asexual for the rest of the half year. Do they need to announce?
No. Exactly.
No.
Why does it matter? It's a good question, and I think that's a lot what we see. It's a lot of that the stress that the LGBTQI community faces is societal stress. It's being part of a sexual minority group, and that means that they're faced more with negativity, with stereotypes. They internalize these negative stereotypes. So it seems that there's still a lot of going on in our society. We have this idea that we are more accepting, because it was a psychiatric diagnosis before. It stopped being a psychiatric diagnosis. There are no conversion therapies. We kind of accept the fact that there is diversity in sexual orientation.
Not forbidden.
Well, that's the question.
The Dutch government or the parliament has not made, from my perspective, a very smart decision last week.
Okay.
And they could have taken a much
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, sexual conversion therapies were very much in fashion after the Second World War by psychiatrists who were running the show, who were also, interestingly, psychoanalysts mostly. And if you look into that, they didn't really have a good reasoning why they came up with that idea, but they just had to produce an idea, so they just said, "Oh, let's do that." The electroshocking of gay men has stopped by and large, but there are enough, mostly faith-based groups that still believe that with a good amount of praying and other activities, you can change the sexual orientation of a human being. And unfortunately, a lot of governments worldwide are not really willing to curb such activities. And in the Netherlands, although very liberal in that sense, they weren't really willing to take a strong stance on it, although the parliament had asked for it.
So it's a missed opportunity, actually, to really sort of spread this idea of accepting, because it seems still, in a way, we are still considering heterosexual to be the more natural, normative thing, and that I sometimes wonder, is it because we don't accept the fact that there's another sexual orientation, or is it just that, people are distressed about it, so we need to deal with the distress, and if people will feel better if we converse them so that there's less distress, then why shouldn't we do it? Why shouldn't we then treat them? Is that the underlying idea, that it's more about the stress rather than the sexual orientation in itself?
I think the arguments that are being put forward by a number of groups are very different, and there is a big variation. Sometimes it's really faith-based, and they say this is not good God's will, and
not natural.
I don't know which God they're talking about, but at least they seem to have a very clear idea in mind what that God, mostly male, most likely, wants or doesn't want. Other governments took a position and saying, well, we can't have an impact. This is religious freedom. So it's actually not so much about the sexual orientation of the conversion.
It's more about the
it's more like we really want to safeguard religious freedom, and hence we're not becoming active. So there are a multitude of positions, and also within these groups, some are sort of putting, we just want to cure and heal these poor souls and put them back on the path of good faith. And I can understand that if you're being subjected to such an environment, that this may seem as the best way out, and this may seem as this is the path to salvation.
But I can also imagine that part of if you're raised in a homophobic environment, you also internalize these negative attitudes, and then you don't accept yourself, which creates distress. So you can sort of feel that part of the distress of having a non-heterosexual sexual orientation is societal stress, because people don't accept you and you kind of internalize these negative ideas. Yeah. Is there still an issue in the community, do you feel, Kenny, that this idea that people are still struggling with their own sexual identity, sexual orientation? Because at this point it seems that, especially in the younger generation, there is more acceptance, there is more tolerance. We do know that there is diversity in sexual orientation. Is there still a lot of struggling?
Well, I do know from some that they are actually trying to figure out what they want, especially at my age, at 20s. Okay, maybe I'm gonna date boys now, and I'm like, do you know you like them? Why are you dating? Yeah, because I don't know for sure. So they are trying to explore, and that's a good thing. I mean, why shouldn't you explore? But then again, some of them actually keep exploring, but they don't get to the point where they actually make a decision. And this is something that you should accept, because some people don't know from one day to the other, okay, now I'm gay or now I'm bi. So yeah. But
at least you have the opportunity to explore, and it's okay nowadays, in the sense that we've come a long way. I mean, it used to be that it was terrible if you, being gay, there was not much opportunity, and now at least you can speak about it, you can be open about it, you can explore, you don't have to hide yourself.
Exactly. And I wanted to give an example from people who are coming from the island where I'm from Curacao in the Caribbean. It's a big taboo to have even a family member that is gay. It's now starting to get more accepted, but I hear from some who come from the island, it's like, now I have more the chance to, explore myself, and finally they come out of the closet. And so it's sometimes very hard to accept, but your social environment has a big role in this.
You touch upon a very important topic, the fact that we feel like, it's more accepting, but that's in Belgium, the Netherlands, in this part. But there are so many countries, even in Eastern Europe, for example, so many countries in which homosexuality is still forbidden, that there are no gay rights, that people cannot marry, that there are so many discriminations still. So it's indeed not a commonly accepted thing. And you say, like in Curacao, that it's still a taboo and it's still difficult. Yeah.
And it's not, it's not only a rights-based question. It's even in Dutch societies, you do find youth that are not struggling at all. I remember some years ago we did interviews. We called them same-sex attracted teenagers, because they didn't have had sex, or so they wouldn't want to put a label on them. And we did some interviews, and some of these boys, they were 15, 16, and some of them say, and then my mom takes me over by car to see my boyfriend in the next village, and I was sitting there like slightly jealous, and like I would have liked to have that. But at the same time, you find counterparts, same age, often coming from a migrant family background or a faith-based background, and it's so much more difficult. And they're not having the loving mother that ferries them around to their boyfriends, and they're sort of living LGBTQI teenager heaven. No, they have a dating profile on a dating app from Friday night till Friday late evening, because that's their window of opportunity to have sex. And then you have this reduction of identity to sex, which is absolutely losing so much more. That's part of it.
It seems that independently of society, it's mainly also religion that has a strong impact on how people treat the community, the non-heterosexual
yes,
young
yes
people?
and no. We actually did research on that, and you do find that it's not necessarily tied to a specific face. It's often tied to a threat to masculinity.
Okay.
And then if you do find that threat to masculinity, it doesn't matter if you're Muslim, Jewish, or Christian. Then that is actually the underlying explaining element.
So we already touched upon the idea of coming out and that it's getting easier nowadays. But are there still obstacles in the coming out process? What are the challenges that people still facing?
Well, the challenge is one of the most important you face right now as a person of the LGBTQI community. The pandemic came, so all the international students from Maastricht University had to go back at their own place. So basically, some of them who came out now had to, instead of develop themselves over here at Maastricht, they had to go back at their families and come out again or just stay in the closet. So
So COVID clearly had an impact on the coming out process. Yeah. And independently of COVID, and if we think about the broader societal landscape nowadays, are there still many obstacles? I mean, we already talked about people are more open to explore and can also talk about it, like, I'm not sure yet, I'm going to see. Or is it for, maybe for some groups, maybe Kai, do you know whether some groups suffer more than other groups in terms of coming out?
Well, I think, yes, many things have gotten much easier, but as long as you still have in Dutch homo as the main curse word on the football stadium or in the context of a football stadium or when you play football, then we still have some work to do. So we definitely need a new word there because you don't want to be that guy that everyone says, well, you're playing football like a gay person. But it's also hitting not so much the lesbian or gay teenagers or young adults. It's also hitting the bisexual teenagers and young adults because they're often even forced by gay or lesbian counterparts that their identity is not accepted, that their identity is seen as, oh yeah, you're just gay and you don't know it, and you don't want to admit it, and we really have to also accept that within these communities we're also often as discriminatory towards each other than the heterosexual enemy, if you want to call it like that. And that is something that we need to work on, and you could go on in especially in the gay community, the exclusion of people of color in dating profiles, no blacks, no Jews, no Asians. You can go on, and what remains is this dream world of masculine, non-gay presenting white guys who think that way they're not vulnerable. And so even within the gay community in particular, there is a lot of stereotyping and discrimination happening. And that's something we need to address and tackle, and also understand that we're not the lovely, cute minority that does everything right. No, we also have to accept that we can be perpetrators too.
So there's like discrimination in different layers and different subgroups, and it's not only, like you said, heterosexual against non-heterosexual. But where does this discrimination come from? You talked about masculinity. Is that the driving force underlying this idea where we have a lot of homophobia? There's lately more recent cases of aggression against homosexual people. Where does it come from, this discrimination?
I think there are many underlying cases you can link it to. One of them that you pointed out was, of course, if you have your preference, that's fine. But some people just take it to the extremes, in which they prefer non-Asian, non-black, what are you looking for then? Is that the only reason you turned gay or bi or something else? So it's very hard, and people from my community, they always talk about these things because, oh my god, last time I personally had a date with someone and oh, I thought you were more masculine. Oh yeah, sorry, no, it's not. And these things happen, and you come to accept those kind of things. But then again, you shouldn't be discriminating while you don't want to be discriminated yourself, right? So you have to draw the line somewhere, and it's good to have references, but some things go too far.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the assumption or the hypothesis behind this is that you, as any minority, you lean towards what is closest to the majority that brings you into a safe space. And we see that in a number of contexts. So there has actually been research among African Americans in the United States that lighter skinned African Americans discriminate against darker skinned African Americans because they hold them accountable for the discrimination they receive.
Yeah.
So it's because of you that I get
that I'm not accepted.
Yeah. You do see it with the so-called model minorities, especially again in the United States, Asian Americans try to be as white as possible so that they blend in. And you have these terms of, for example, the banana. You're yellow on the outside but white on the inside, and you have a number of fruits that sort of try to convey the same message. Among gay men, it's the same thing. The more masculine you appear, there's also the search term on gay dating apps, mask for mask, that keeps you in the safe space. And hence people that are more feminine in their presentation are seen as a threat to masculinity. And we come back to masculinity threat. That seems to be a unifying.
Yeah, it seems to be a huge thing.
Yeah, toxic masculinity.
Is that also what drives? I mean, the aggression. I mean, there's the gay bashing, the negative, the violence against gay people. It seems to be increasing a little bit more again. Because I also had the idea often that like the younger generation is more woke, so they're more accepting. So it's mainly the older generation who doesn't really understand, which is mainly the case because they don't know, or it's about raising awareness. But it seems to be that also the younger generation, there's a group of people who are really intolerant. And how do you perceive that in our current society?
Yeah, well, you perceive that as it's a pity that they are intolerant, but there's nothing you can change about them, and there will always be people who are intolerant. And personally, I see some people when I walk on the street and I have my best friend with me. Well, my best friend loves to be a little extra. Sometimes he wears a bag or an earring. He is very extravagant, but he's a nice person, and you really feel his vibe when you talk to him. But when we walk on the street, people sometimes they look at him like, what is this guy? Why is he wearing heels or something like that? And then you already see people judging, and some people really unaccepted. And I really think that's something that should be addressed, because
I mean, let everyone be what they
let
want
everyone
to
be what
and
yes,
freedom, and just freedom in expressing yourself.
Exactly. But you see this, and it's in certain places when you go, he knows that, okay, now I'm gonna dress like more manly, because I know we're gonna get looks if I dress otherwise. So it's still there, and it's not gonna change very soon.
Although I would be careful to say it has increased. We don't have good numbers. And
maybe it's also because there's more media attention, and then you have the impression.
The moment you start looking, you got to see it. And some decades ago, we didn't look.
Exactly.
And then
or it was more hidden.
Or it was more hidden. And we've done studies on reporting of hate crimes by gay men. The percentages in the Netherlands, but also on a European level, they are shockingly low. There are sometimes in some surveys there are zero. So they experience it, but they don't do anything with it. So the moment it becomes something in media, it sort of surfaces, it gets a lot of attention. I wouldn't say it has increased.
But it's just get more attention. The good thing what we do see is when you have these media cases, that it immediately elicits a wave of disgust, and people are supporting then the gay community and are against all this intolerance. So it also has a positive. I mean, I think we also often think about the gay community or the LGBTQI community in terms of distress and sexual minority distress and negativity, but there's also a lot of empowerment. There's also a lot of positivity going on. So we should also engage more in a positive view on this community.
Absolutely, and I think one of the challenges for community work, for research, is to find out sort of why does it go in a good way for one and why does it turn in a bad way for another person? Because we do see that there are growing amounts of gay men, lesbian women, also transgender, that experience very positive environments and that are leading fairly happy lives. So it's not all bad. So the challenge is actually to find out what are the determinants that it goes bad for some, and why others are just thinking like, no, I don't have a problem. And that's also an issue for solidarity within the community.
No, it's a good point to sort of really focus more on resilience and risk and tackle both instead of only thinking about the negative aspects. So we were talking about discrimination and stereotypes, and there are a lot of stereotypes about a homosexual being more female or whatever. So that also turns back to the studies on are there any differences, brain differences between heterosexual and homosexuals, as if we want to know whether there's a nature-nurture element in this sexual orientation debate. So what do we think about this? And what does the community think about this? Because it's also, I mean, it's not free of moral judgment if you do this type of research. So maybe, Kai, what does the community, what does the research, how is it inspired? What is the general aim of this type of research?
Well, it has died down a bit, so it's not so fashionable at the moment anymore. It was some years ago. The researchers who worked on this didn't really find convincing evidence, so I would still argue there is no difference. If you ask the question, what's the aim or what's the context? Again, it is research that is inspired in the US-American context. And if you're able, based on a biological difference, you can claim advantages. You can say, I am X and I can't do anything against it. And hence,
it's part of my brain structure.
You have to give me something. And in a way, you could even say that goes back to a medicalization of sexual orientation. So you try to use it as something that's inevitable, that can't get cured, and hence you may have some advantages. And that was actually met with quite a lot of resistance in the gay community. But others were hoping to get advantages out of it.
But you could say advantages, but was there any idea of, well, if we can locate differences in the brain structure, we can change it also? Because then we can do targeted interventions and try to manipulate that brain?
It wasn't, well, for neuromodulation, that's your job. But I don't think that we'll go back to electroshock therapy. I think a lot of people were hoping that they could come up with some sort of prenatal diagnosis, and then you find out, okay, your son will be gay. Do you want that or you don't want that?
Oh God!
Luckily, this
really
never
lucky that it never happened.
materialized. But it's if you of course think of the dream child, then that's maybe something you don't want. But as I said before, it's not very attractive and not very ongoing, and I haven't seen any research funding being handed out to research groups like that. So I kind of think it's a bit of a non-issue.
Okay, well, finally it lay down, because I also think that, I mean, it does something also, it says something, if you do this type of research, I mean, there's kind of an underlying idea. Now, we already tackled a lot of things. I like the idea that there's minority distress, discrimination, there's violence, there's struggles, there are obstacles, but there are also good things. There's a lot of empowerment and positive issues. But where are we now and how can we evolve? What are still issues that we need to tackle for this LGBTQI community? What are the stress they're still, the challenges they're still facing? How can we move and evolve towards becoming a more accepting, inclusive, tolerant society? What steps do we still need to take?
That was a big question.
Yeah, it's a lot of questions in one. I think it's more like where we stand now and where should we, how should we move on? And how can we sort of become more accepting and tolerant?
I think you have to ask, I'm sorry, I think you have to ask the question really specific per group. You know, for trans individuals, it is a completely different story.
Yeah, that's true. Again, we come to the group.
Then for gay men, lesbian women often lack visibility. bisexual individuals also get subsumed, or it's seen as a phase. So it's really very different groups. What do we need to achieve? We need to achieve non-discriminatory equal treatment. That's often easier said than done. When you work on sex education for teenagers, for children, it's often really difficult to give them all of these options, because that also can be very confusing. And then it's a question of how do you do this in a phased manner, and when do you talk about certain topics and when do you not talk about certain topics. And it's also not only the job of schools, it's the job of parents, friends, the whole society to portray any member of the LGBTQI spectrum in a positive way, so that everybody who wants to become something gets a positive role model. And it's these small things. I think it's important that at the university you have staff and senior students that are openly gay or lesbian, and that a first year student who doesn't really know what he or she or they like can get like, I kind of like that, so let's try out this. So that you have role models, and that you give space for experimentation that is non-judgmental. And also give individuals the opportunity to change.
And to be flexible.
And to be flexible. And that, I think, is a really important topic for everybody. In certain cultural contexts, there is this idea of that you can play until you're 30. And then you have to go to the safe haven of heterosexual marriage.
Heterosexual monogamy.
Sure. But that who knows that certain sexual orientation preferences may change. I always have this sort of very important image for me. My parents have a friend, was a business friend of my dad. He came over always with his boyfriend from Milan in very nice cars. I was into cars, so I was more into the cars than into him. But what I find fascinating in that story is that this man, due to the HIV crisis and losing so many lovers, at a certain moment decided, I had enough. I want to be with a woman because I don't want to lose yet another partner. And even that is possible. Although a lot of gay men would go like, no, he's still gay.
Yeah, it's about indeed the diversity, accepting that everyone has a different position in it, and but it's also what you touch upon, the idea of sex education, and I think that's also one way that we need to change is the current form of a type of sex education, which is still heterosexual. I mean, if you think about standard sex education at school, I think we should sort of include more gender diversity and include more differences in sexual orientation, and at least tackle the topic, but also in the examples you give, the lessons you give, that people are, I mean, already from early on, deeply ingrained by this idea of heterosexual relationships, so that should be more like diversity included.
Exactly. And I can give an example. At my high school, they had this special day in which sexologists, and they would come to school and give lectures and have open groups where all the students could actually discuss this. And there was this one classmate that actually came out right on that day on the spot, because the opportunity was there and he felt like, now I should share it. And that his parents didn't even know this. So, and you see how important it is to bring it on very early in stage. Because I also heard of my friends that met people that were over 30 and they came out way later. And if you can have the opportunity to do it earlier, it saves a lot of hassle. So I think the earlier the better. But you have to find. So I think high school is already a very good place to start.
Okay. Is there something you would add, Kenny, if we think about this question of what steps do we still need to take to become a more inclusive and accepting and tolerant society?
Oh, yeah, that's a hard
It's a big question, I know, but if you want to think about some issues that you think, this is something we still need to work on.
Maybe also it's in the small things. For instance, if you have an application for a job, or you always feel this edge of am I being accepted as a gay person or not? It goes to different places. Also, if you go to the student ambassador here at Maastricht University, you feel accepted now, no matter what you have. So I would say raise awareness not only at the university, also at jobs, but because sometimes we say we are like this. I mean, if you look at LinkedIn right now, you see all the flags and the colors for companies. So now they raise awareness and they show it about. But is that the case when it's not the Pride Month?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Now that's a good point. So it's in general, I think what we can think it's about indeed raising more awareness, accepting diversity, and I think that was the main message of today's episode, also to sort of to cover the different topics.
And change is happening.
Yeah.
You know, I was being told 20 years ago, don't talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't tell.
There is more openness, that's true.
And 20 years later, I'm the first openly gay president of the European Association of Social Psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of smile back at those guys who told me 20 years ago, don't tell.
Don't tell.
Like, no, I told, and it served me well.
Okay, well, thank you both for being here and for sharing this interesting knowledge and interesting information. It was a nice discussion. So I think we have raised a little bit more awareness, I hope. So thank you all for joining, and see you next time. Bye.